Anybody ever say something to you, perhaps it's something that you think is unkind, and then you find it hard to let go of that thing that they said to you? No. Or does anyone ever do something to you that you think is unfair or that you think is hurtful, and then you find it hard not to let go of your anger or of your resentment towards them about whatever it is that they did? Or does somebody ever say something or do something to you like that, and you find that it's really hard to let go of the story and to let go of how they've done you wrong? Yeah? You know, as human beings, people will always say things to us that make us angry or that hurt our feelings. People will say things that are unkind, or at least things that aren't very thoughtful, and things that are hurtful. And in turn, we get our feelings hurt, and we get angry, and sometimes we get resentful, and sometimes we can even hold on to that resentment for years, or sometimes we can hold on to that resentment for an entire lifetime. I know my brother-in-law's grandmother got mad at her sister for something that she said or did, and they didn't speak to each other for the rest of their lives. You can hold on to resentment for a long time like that. Well, Marianne Williamson speaks to that in her book, Everyday Grace, and she says, when someone has forgotten their love, when someone says something that is hurtful or unkind, when someone has forgotten their love, they have fallen asleep to who they are. And our mystical challenge and our spiritual power lies in choosing to remain awake. So what does that mean, to remain awake? I think that to remain awake means to know that no one is responsible for our own peace and our sense of well-being, but instead that peace and well-being is an inside job, that it comes from inside of us. I think remaining awake means to recognize that we have human emotions, that we have our feelings hurt sometimes, that we get angry sometimes, but to know that we have a choice, that we can stay angry or hurt, or we can do whatever it is that we need to do to take care of ourselves in the moment, and to allow ourselves to have those emotions and then to move through those emotions, and then to get to the other side of them and to move back into our own inner wholeness, to move back into our own inner peace, to move back into our innate ability to love and to be loving. I think it means taking responsibility for our actions and our reactions. And to me, remaining awake means to remember that I am on a spiritual path, and that is what's going on here. And to recognize that no matter what it is that's happening in my life, it is part of that spiritual path, and that everything contains within it the opportunity for my own awakening and to give way to something greater, a greater part of myself, a greater understanding of who I am, a greater realization, but it's always an opportunity to bring forward something greater. Because what happens, those choices that we make, whether we make the choice to stay angry and resentful and hurt, or if we make the choice to move through it and then to sink back into our own wholeness, those choices are like a river. And a river moves the land and changes the landscape around it. Those choices that we make move the things around us and change the landscape of our lives depending on which ones we choose. And so in the Bible it says, I shall walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and I shall not be afraid, for thou art with me. But do you notice it says, I shall walk through the valley of the shadow of death, not set up camp and stay there. There will always be times There will always be times in our life when we feel like we are walking through that darkness, when we feel like we are in that valley. There will always be times like that because things are not always going to go according to our desires and according to our plans and according to the way that we think they should be and the way we want them to be. That's not how life works. Things aren't going to be in alignment with our preferences all the time. And at the same time, what we really want is to live with a sense of peace. What we really want is to live with ease and to move through our lives with ease. What we really want is serenity, and we want to live in joy. And as spiritual beings, and because we are walking this spiritual path, what we also really want to do is to let go of whatever is keeping us stuck. We want to let go of whatever is keeping us small. We want to let go of whatever it is that is keeping us from flourishing and from feeling vibrant and from feeling alive and from living fully. That's what we really want. You know, some years ago, I actually read an interview, saw it in an interview with Diane Sawyer, who was interviewing J.C. Dugard. And you remember she was the little girl who was kidnapped when she was 11 years old, and she was held captive for 18 years before she was released. And in that interview with Diane Sawyer, it was so amazing because that girl was filled with delight, and she was filled with hope. And she talked all about these new beginnings. And at some point in the interview, Diane Sawyer asked her, "Are you angry and resentful?" And her response was, "No, because if I were to be angry or resentful, it would be to let him still have control over me. And I am not willing to let him have control over me for one more moment of my life." She was choosing freedom by letting go. What happens is when we hold on to that resentment and the anger and the hurt and the blame and how we've been done wrong, is we keep ourselves stuck in the past. Do you get that? My brother-in-law's grandmother was keeping herself stuck in the past. We keep ourselves stuck in what isn't working. We keep ourselves stuck in victimhood. And we keep ourselves stuck in a place that is powerless. Because what we are doing is allowing our well-being to be reliant on somebody else's choices and actions, and that takes us out of our own power. And the other thing is, as long as we stay in that anger and that resentment and that fear, what we're going to do is we are going to attract other people to us in our lives who are also angry and fearful and resentful. And the people that interact in a healthy way, people who are self-actualized, we will actually push them away. Because we can only attract and keep in our lives what we resonate with, what we are like. That's why they say misery loves company. You attract those people who want to commiserate with you. And so what happens is as we access the courage within us to stay open, as we choose out of that courage openness over woundedness or openness over brokenness, as we choose love instead of fear, we move into the realm of our spirit. When we choose love over fear, when we choose openness, what happens is we open ourselves to a richness of life. We open ourselves to experience the beauty of our own soul. JC was getting to experience the beauty of her own soul instead of her wounded personality part of herself. We open ourselves to our own divinity, that divine presence within us, and life then becomes richer, and it becomes fuller, and it becomes more rewarding, and it becomes more satisfying. And we become happier, and we become more fulfilled. And so the title of my talk today is Prize Inside. And I'm talking about how, like a box of Cracker Jacks, when we stay open, when we choose love instead of fear, when we choose to stay open instead of shutting down and closing off, we open to the gifts of our own soul. We open to the gift that is inherent in the situation and the circumstance that we have found ourselves in. And so let me give you some examples of that. Say that your spouse yells at you. And so your initial reaction is to get angry or to feel hurt. But if you stay open, and what that means is you have those feelings of being hurt and angry, which are human feelings, but you allow yourself to move through them and you stay open, maybe what happens is in that openness you discover your authentic voice. You discover how to say with an open heart and still feeling connected, I don't deserve to be spoken to that way, and to actually ask for what it is that you need. Or perhaps you stay open, and in your openness, what you see is that your spouse is going through a very difficult time. And in your openness, you can remain open-hearted, and you can remain compassionate. And out of that, what happens is there is a deeper connection, and there is more intimacy in your relationship than you've had before, and your relationship becomes better. I know we've all had those experiences when we get angry and stomp off or attack back and nothing is resolved. But do you see that how if you stay open, there's an opportunity for evolution. There's an opportunity for change. There's an opportunity for things to improve and be better. And so another example might be, let's say that you are frustrated and angry at your teenager who is acting out. Well, if you choose to stay open, and if you choose love instead of staying in your frustration and your irritation and your judgment, perhaps you will discover that you have some deep wisdom to share, but you have to figure out how to be able to have them actually hear you. But you only discover that in your openness, and that wisdom that you have to share changes their life forever. Or perhaps in your openness, what you realize is really they need to be seen, and they need to be heard, and they need to understand that they are valuable and that they are important. And that's really what's going on. But you can only discover that in your openness. Perhaps you choose love over fear, and then you meet a homeless person, you end up having a discussion and talk and connection and recognize this love and connection and oneness that you didn't know you had. The gifts are endless. There are so many gifts, and I couldn't possibly name them all because every situation is going to be different, and every situation is going to have a different opportunity and a different gift, but we only discover them when we are open and willing instead of shut down and angry and closed off and resentful. And so I'd like to share a story with you that I read. He says, in my mid-40s, I began to drift a little from my core values. 2 in particular. First, friends. Simply put, I had plenty of them and wasn't in the market for more. Life was busy, and frankly, I didn't have the time. This from the guy who loved It's a Wonderful Life so much that he placed Clarence's reminder to George Bailey, quote, no man is a failure who has friends, in his senior yearbook in the year 1989. And second, outlook. I had the good fortune to graduate from a Jesuit high school. Here, the importance of living as, quote, a man for others was drilled into us from the very first day of school. I'd gotten away from that principle too. 2 simple ideas. In April 2016, I received a diagnosis of melanoma. This wasn't the plan. Thankfully, it was stage 0. Still, it required substantial surgery, and one day afterward, while sitting uncomfortably on a plane, I was feeling sorry for myself. Then I met Jeff Gullaboo. He was seated next to me on the flight home from Charlotte. As an investment in armchair relations, I offered Jeff a stick of gum, handing him the pack. He proceeded to remove one stick from the pack and hand that lonely stick back to me. Then he put the nearly full pack in his chest pocket and reacquainted himself with his newspaper. Jeff side-eyed me as I, suddenly short 14 sticks of gum, contemplated fight or flight. Then, laughing, he confirmed that he was just messing with me. A good-natured discussion followed, and through the laughter, though, Jeff made one thing clear. A fight would not have been a good idea, as he would have knocked me around like a screen door in a hurricane. I don't generally talk to seatmates on planes, but something about this colorful guy from North Carolina mountains drew me in. We chatted for about 3/4 of the flight. Then Jeff invited me into what sounded like an elite group of guys who train together every week. Instantly, my non-joiner warning lights flashed red, and I demurred, citing my recent cancer surgery. This was Jeff's answer to that. Son, I had open heart surgery a few months ago, but whatever, I'm not going to invite you twice. He went back to his newspaper, and we wrote out the remainder of our flight in silence. We traded business cards when we touched down, but it was mostly a courtesy. I never planned on seeing Jeff again. When I got home that night, a strange thing happened. It went something like this. I told my wife, I have this strange feeling that I'm supposed to be at the park 6:30 this Saturday morning to work out with a bunch of guys that I've never met before. Devin, my wife, was shocked. The last time you voluntarily got out of bed on a weekend, your parents were driving you to summer camp. Why are you doing this, she asked. He says, because anyone who can verbally manhandle me the way this guy did is worth getting to know better. What followed was a rededication not only to my physical fitness, but to fellowship. Not for the sake of career advancement, social standing, or anything like that. Simply for its own reward. Bonding around fun stuff, sure. Laughter and the ribbing. But also around the real stuff. Aging, death, job loss, suicide, marital difficulties, faith and doubt, parenting challenges, and more health scares. Falling in with Jeff and the rest of the Campos is the best thing that happened to me in a long time. And it happened because for once I stopped planning and went with the flow. For once, really, because he was open. In our openness, we get to receive the gifts. In the openness, we discover the gifts that we never would have seen had we not been open. The gifts are endless. Only when we stay open instead of burrowing down into our hurt and our woundedness when our spouse yells at us. In our choosing love over fear, whether it's love of ourself or love of others. But in order to choose openness instead of closedness, in order to choose love over fear, in order to move past our emotions and into willingness, I really think we must have a strong sense of self. We must have this strong anchor inside of ourselves that we can return to. We must be able to access and move into that deep place of our own wholeness and our own enoughness to be able to stand strong and to be able to come forward as that love and compassion, or as the kindness, or as the willingness to hear and to be different. We come from our spirit. And that happens when we meditate. That happens when we do the practice of centering. We discover this deep center that becomes the steel rod so that we don't get knocked off center and aren't able to come back. But it takes practice to be able to come back to that. In Psalm 18:2, it says, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my Savior. My God is my rock, in whom I find protection. God is my shield, the power that saves me, my place of safety. God within you is your rock. God within you is your place of safety and your place of sanctuary and your place of peace. God within you is that high fortress. And so we tap into that presence within us, that stillness within our very being, and then we act from there in the world. Because if we don't have that deep anchor and we don't have that connection, then we are solely and only acting from our ego, which is the part of us that gets hurt and angry and wants to stay there. We have to be able to tap into something else, but it only happens with practice. And so Mark Nepo speaks to this in a beautiful way in his book, 7,000 Ways to Listen. He says, in truth, our hearts keep moving through all the moods like whales who can't stay under too long or surface too long. Our destiny to swim above, then below, only to break the surface and then the depth again and again. Each time we enter the unspoken, we are allowed to escape the noise of the world, so we might descend into the currents below speech, where all hearts beat as one. Underneath everything is the beat of our hearts, in the silence that keeps the world going. Like a whale, we are in the world and we dive deep, so that we can come up into the world again peaceful and centered, and we dive deep again. We can't stay at the surface, and we can't stay at the depths. We move back and forth. But the more we visit the deep, the easier it is to be at the surface, and the more peaceful we are then. And so we commune with our own soul. We commune with that ineffable, infinite presence, that unbreakable connection within us. There we find our wholeness. There we find our centeredness. There we create our own anchor. And out of that oneness, then we have the ability to choose to stay open, to choose love. Then we have the ability to actually step through our brokenness into our wholeness. We then have the ability to step through our fear into our love. We have then the ability to discover the gift that is present in that situation and the ability to evolve, because we're stepping into who we are at our spiritual core, our own essence. We step into the world from that place. Ernest Holmes says, there is that within every individual which partakes of the nature of universal wholeness, and insofar as it operates, is God. We tap into that. Then we come into the world as a beneficial presence. Then we come into the world bringing that presence of the divine, the presence of love and of peace and of good with us, because we've discovered inside of here first. So we anchor into our spirit, and then we come forward with the ability to choose love. Open. And so my invitation to you is to commune with the silence of your own being. Commune with that divine presence within you, with yourself, with a capital S, until you feel like you have this anchor within you, that it's easy to return there at any time. Because once you develop the ease to return there at any time, it also starts walking with you through your day, and you don't get knocked off center as easily either. Sit in that silence and discover your anchor and discover your wholeness. And then choose openness. Choose to remain open and choose love. Then life will have such a greater ease, and you will be experiencing greater peace and more joy and more love and deeper soul satisfaction. And so blessings to you all as you walk this path of self-discovery, discovering your own spirit, and blessing those around you with that spirit, and blessing yourself at the same time with that awareness. So blessings to all of you. And so I invite you to join me in an affirmative prayer. And so how good it is just to answer that call of our own souls, to commune with that infinite one that is always closer than our very breathing, that infinite one that is the core essence of who we are, and that infinite one that fills this entire universe with its beingness, that one that fills this entire universe with its magnificence and with its beauty and with its love. Recognizing that this presence is life itself, the life that is living itself within and as each and every single one of us. And so today we open up and we step into that light, and we step in as that light. For in our openness, that presence cannot not flow through us. And so in our openness, that presence flows into us and through us as an abundance of good. It flows into us and through us as peace and as love and as the truth of our own wholeness, as a sense of anchoredness, as a sense of being a blessing everywhere we go. For we bring this light with us and we share it with those around us. And as we open up to that light of the divine, it shines out from us and fills our home, and fills our places of work, and moves with us as we walk in the streets. That presence goes out and goes before us and opens the way and makes the way plain and smooth and easy and makes the crooked places straight. For in our recognition of this oneness, everything shifts and everything becomes much more like heaven on earth. For this is truly the presence that we walk in, a presence of heaven here, all around us. And so today we lean in and we trust and we have faith and we remain open and we receive a tremendous blessing in that. And so I release this prayer into that infinite law, knowing that it is already unfolding itself because we have said yes. And so I release this prayer in gratitude, and I say, and so it is.
Go ahead.